thousands of years ago. In a time when the mist-covered mountains of ancient China whispered hidden secrets, to those who dared to listen, there lived a sage named Zhuangzi, whose wisdom surpassed the boundaries of ordinary thought. He was not a king adorned in jade, nor a general leading thousands, but a humble philosopher whose mind wandered far beyond the reach of silk robes, golden palaces, and the petty ambitions of the mortal world. Zhuangzi lived simply in a small hut near the edge of a forest, often seen wearing patched clothing and straw shoes. Yet his eyes held the clarity of a mountain spring and the depth of an ancient, starlit sky. One late afternoon, under the golden warmth of a sun that seemed to stand still, the sage felt a peaceful weariness settle upon his bones and his overworked mind. He found a spot beneath a sprawling willow tree, its emerald branches swaying like the hair of a dancing spirit moving to a melody that only the earth could hear. The air was thick with the scent of wild jasmine, accompanied by the hypnotic humming of the cicadas, creating a natural lullaby that no mortal soul could easily resist. As Zhuangzi leaned against the protective bark of the tree, his eyelids fluttered closed, and the solid world of men began to dissolve into a soft mist of silver. In an instant, the weight of his physical body vanished, and he felt an exhilarating sensation of lightness spreading through his soul, as if he were being untethered from the earth. When he opened his eyes within the depths of his slumber, the willow tree and the dusty road were gone, replaced by a garden of colors so brilliant they seemed to vibrate with inner light. He looked down at his hands, but they were no longer weathered by age. Instead, they were replaced by delicate, shimmering wings of vibrant orange and velvet black. Zhuangzi was no longer a man burdened by questions. He was a butterfly, a creature of pure air and effortless grace, dancing through a world that knew nothing of human sorrow. He flapped his wings, feeling the cool rush of the breeze lifting him high above the swaying flowers and the tangled vines of a paradise stretching toward the horizon. In this new existence, there was no memory of the sage named Zhuangzi, no memory of his dusty books, and no heavy burden of complex human philosophy or social duty. He was simply a butterfly, fluttering joyfully from petal to petal, tasting the crystalline nectar of life without a single care or a single shadow in his heart. The world felt like a playground of golden light where time was not measured by hours, but only by the gentle, rhythmic beating of his own fragile wings. He danced with the wind, spiraling toward the clouds, feeling a sense of absolute freedom that surpassed anything he had ever experienced. In his long years as a scholar, to the butterfly, the mountains were merely ripples in a green sea, and the rushing rivers were nothing more than silver threads woven into the fabric of a breathing earth. He soon found a companion, another butterfly with wings the color of a pale summer sky, and together they performed a silent, intricate ballet amidst the blooming orchids. In that perfect state of being, there was no I or thou, only the pure movement of the soul and the ancient pulse of nature. The butterfly did not wonder about the meaning of life. It simply lived it, embodying the essence of the Tao in every flap of its wings. However, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold, a sudden chill swept through the once warm garden. The butterfly felt a strange pull at its core, as if an invisible anchor had been dropped into the middle of a beautiful, floating dream. The vibrant colors began to bleed into gray. The scent of jasmine turned into the smell of dry earth, and his companion vanished into the gathering shadows. With a jarring jolt, Zhuangzi's eyes snapped open, and he found himself once again staring at the drooping underside of the ancient willow tree. He sat up abruptly, his breath coming in short gasps, his hands trembling as they touched the solid, uncompromising ground beneath him. He looked intently at his fingers, tracing the lines of his palms to confirm the reality of his human flesh and bone. He was Zhuangzi again, the philosopher with a tangled beard and a mind suddenly flooded with 1,000 troubling questions about the nature of sight. Yet as he sat there in the fading light, a profound confusion washed over him, more unsettling than any logical riddle he had ever encountered. He remembered the feeling of the wind against his wings so vividly that his human back felt strangely heavy and empty. He remembered the sweet taste of the nectar on his tongue, a sensation that felt more nourishing than the simple porridge he had eaten for breakfast. Was I, he whispered to the silent woods, a man dreaming I was a butterfly? Or am I now a butterfly dreaming that I am a man? The question hung in the cool air, unanswered by the rustling leaves or the distant call of a crane flying toward the marshes. Zhuangzi stood up slowly, his legs feeling heavy and clumsy compared to the weightless grace he had just experienced in his slumber. He began to walk back toward his hut, but every step felt like a journey through an uncertain landscape, where the ground might turn to air at any moment. On his way, he passed a neighbor, a farmer named Lausan, who was returning from the fields with a heavy hoe slung over his sturdy shoulder. "Good evening, Master Zhuang. The harvest looks promising, does it not?" the farmer called out, but the sage only stared at him with searching eyes. To the farmer, the world was solid, the dirt was dirt, and the man standing before him was definitely a man of flesh and blood. But Zhuangzi saw the farmer as a flickering flame of spirit, a temporary manifestation that might wake up as a bird or a stone in the cycle of tomorrow. Reaching his hut, the sage did not light his lamp. Instead, he sat in the darkness, watching the silver moon rise over the silent peaks. He thought deeply of the great transformation, the core belief that all things are in a constant, beautiful state of flux, shifting from one form to another. A seed becomes a tree becomes charcoal, and charcoal becomes smoke. Where, he wondered, does the true self reside in this turning cycle? If the dream felt as real and as meaningful as the waking state, then what authority did the waking state have to claim the ultimate truth? He realized that the labels humans use, man, butterfly, life, death, are merely small cages for a reality as vast as the sea. The next morning, his disciple Zhuangzi, who loved the precision of logic, arrived with a scroll of arguments and a brow furrowed in concentration. Master, Zhuangzi said, bowing, I have been contemplating the distinction between the soul and the body, and I find no logical bridge that connects the two. Zhuangzi looked at his student and laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a courtyard, full of a mirth that Zhuangzi could not understand. Yesterday, in the heat of the afternoon, I was a butterfly, the sage remarked, and I had no need for a bridge because there was no river to cross. Zhuangzi looked puzzled, for he was a man of strict definitions who preferred the safety of solid ground and clearly labeled boxes for every thought. But you are clearly a man, master, Zhuangzi insisted, tapping the table. This is wood, you are human, and a butterfly is merely an insect. Zhuangzi tilted his head, watching a silver spider weave its web in the corner of the ceiling, a masterpiece created by a creature with no ego. If the butterfly in my dream does not know it is Zhuangzi, the sage asked, then how can Zhuangzi know for certain he is not the butterfly? Zhuangzi sighed, long accustomed to his teacher's unconventional wisdom, yet always drawn back by the feeling that there was a truth he was missing. If we cannot trust our senses to tell us exactly where we stand, Zhuangzi argued, then we are lost in a sea of madness. Or, Zhuangzi countered with a smile, perhaps we are finally free from the narrow prison of human certainty. He explained that most people spend their lives building thick walls of logic around their identity, terrified that any crack will let the void in. They cling to their names, titles, and histories as if these fleeting things were immortal and unchanging parts of their soul. But the butterfly knows a secret. It accepts its brief life and fragile body without a single moment of fear or resistance. Throughout the following weeks, the legend of the butterfly dream began to spread among the villagers, monks, and rival sages. Some dismissed Zhuangzi as a madman who had spent too much time in the sun. Others whispered that he was perhaps the only man truly awake. He paid no mind to the gossip, for he was too busy observing the natural world with a childlike wonder that saw the divine in the mundane. He watched the fish darting in the stream and wondered if they, too, dreamt of walking on dry land as men do. He watched the white clouds drifting and wondered if they felt like solid mountains. In their own misty consciousness, the hard distinction between himself and the universe began to soften, like ink dropping into a bowl of clear mountain water. One afternoon, a high-ranking official arrived in a carriage of gold, bearing an invitation for Zhuangzi to become the king's chief advisor. The official spoke of power, of vast influence, and of a legacy that would be carved into stone for 1,000 years. Zhuangzi looked at the official's heavy robes and the many jade ornaments that clinked like chains. With every movement, he remembered being a butterfly, where the only power was the wind, and the only influence was the scent of a flower. I have heard a story, Zhuangzi said, of a sacred tortoise that has been dead for 3,000 years, preserved as a holy relic. The king keeps its shell wrapped in silk and stored in a precious box, within his most private ancestral temple. Now, tell me, Zhuangzi asked, would that tortoise rather be dead and honored in a box, or alive and wagging its tail in the mud? The official stammered, caught off guard. Why? It would surely rather be alive and wagging its tail in the mud, of course. Then you have your answer, Zhuangzi said. Go back to your king and tell him I shall stay here and continue to wag my tail in the mud. The official left in a huff, unable to comprehend a man who would choose dirt over a throne. But Zhuangzi knew the throne was just another dream, a temporary illusion of control in a world governed by the effortless flow of the Tao. As the years passed and his hair turned to snow, his physical body grew frail, but his spirit became as light as the wings he had once dreamt of. He no longer feared death, for he saw it not as an end, but as a natural shift from one state of being to the next. His disciples gathered around his bedside in his final days, their faces clouded with the dark mist of grief. Master, one student asked, how shall we bury you? We must prepare a coffin and a monument befitting your wisdom. Zhuangzi smiled, his eyes bright even as his breath grew shallow. I shall have heaven and earth for my coffin. The sun and moon shall be my burial jewels, and the stars shall be my pearls, he added, looking at the twilight sky. All of creation shall be my funeral procession. What more could a man need for his journey? The disciples were horrified. But the crows and the kites will eat your remains, master, they cried in anguish. Zhuangzi chuckled weakly. Above ground I shall be eaten by crows. Below ground I shall be eaten by ants. Why should we be so biased as to rob one creature just to feed another? He asked, teaching his final lesson on interconnectedness. In his last moments, the room seemed to fill with a soft light, and the faint scent of wild jasmine returned to his senses. He closed his eyes for the final time as a man, and once again felt the sensation of his body dissolving into the golden air. He was not afraid, for he knew that the dark is simply the back of the light, and both are necessary for the dance of existence. Whether he woke as a butterfly, a blade of grass, or the wind that moved the clouds, it did not matter, for all were parts of the same whole. He had learned the secret. To flow with the Tao is to be immortal in every moment, regardless of the shape you take. The boundary between the dreamer and the dream, between man and butterfly, had finally vanished into the great oneness. The story of Zhuangzi and his butterfly dream remains one of the most profound legends in the history of human thought. It challenges us to look at our own lives and ask, what is truly real? And what is merely a projection of our minds? Are we the masters of our destiny, or are we just players in a vast, cosmic dream that is constantly changing form? Like the sage under the willow tree, we may find that the answer lies not in logic, but in the simple act of being present. To live with the grace of a butterfly and the wisdom of a mountain is the true path toward inner peace. The next time you see a butterfly fluttering through a quiet garden, pause for a moment and simply wonder, is it just a small insect? Or is it a great philosopher who has finally found a way to enjoy a well-deserved nap? The dream of the butterfly continues even now, weaving its way through the hearts of all those who seek the truth. Thank you for joining us. Remember to comment, like, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio for more timeless tales of wisdom.